phase, we get really, really heavy, volume gets low, we induce a lot of fatigue, we're real strong, but we're also really tired and beat up. So the idea of a taper is to let ourselves recover and get fresh, but maintain that strength as much as possible. So again, at this point, we're not doing much else besides competition lifts, because we want to be as specific as possible. But what we're going to do to kind of facilitate that, to allow strength to stay high, but fatigue to drop off, is the first thing we want to do is drop the volume quite significantly. Volume's a bigger contributor to fatigue than intensity is. So the total amount of work you do matters more in terms of how tired you get than how heavy you go. And if you think about it, that kind of makes sense. If I do like 4 sets of 12, even if it's like 70%, where I do like 2 or 3 sets of 1 at like 90%, those are both like 3 to 4 hard sets. But when I'm doing all those 12s, that's where I'm going to be beat up and tired and get that like muscle soreness and stuff like that in the following days. Whereas if I'm like doing a couple of heavy reps, I don't have that kind of like that same amount of fatigue. So volume drops first, intensity, eventually we have to drop it off. So if I'm like training real heavy all the way up to a competition, that's not ideal. I need to drop the intensity off, but I want to drop it kind of as at the last possible minute that I can, so that I keep it as high as possible. That's going to maintain my strength, and then drop it off at the last portion. So that's kind of that idea of a taper. We drop volume and then we drop intensity last. So it kind of looks a little bit something like this, and this is what's called the fitness fatigue model, or the two-factor theory. I don't know, you guys all familiar with that? All right, okay, cool. So there's a bunch of lines going on here. Each of these columns represents a week of training. The block represents volume, dotted line represents intensity. So you can see, like in this week, we've got volume at the highest, intensities at like a moderate position. As we go into the next week, intensity goes up, volume goes down. So the line's going on over top. Every time I train, I talked a little bit about this in the fatigue idea, we get a couple of effects. One's positive, one's negative. So negatively, I get tired. I induce fatigue. I train real hard, I'm going to be beat up and tired. But I also get a positive effect. I produce or provide the stimulus for adaptation. So I get better motor pattern wise, provide the stimulation to build bigger muscles. So that's what's called like fitness, which is my positive adaptation to training. The other one, the negative adaptation, getting tired, is fatigue. And so those net combine to result in performance, which is how well I can actually lift. So immediately after a hard training session, I am not actually stronger. And if you think about it, if you go through like a real hard training session and you're like beat up and exhausted at the end, you're not actually better at that point. You only get bigger, stronger, or whatever when you take that time to recover and bounce back. So basically what happens with those two things, fatigue drops off faster than fitness, and fitness will eventually drop off too. So that if you think about that, like let's say I have that real hard training session, I wait 3 days, maybe I'm like recovered, I'm pretty strong. If I wait like 2 weeks, that's too long between training, so any kind of positive adaptations that I've incurred from that training session are gone. Like I lost them. So what this means is that we're gonna be able to manipulate that fatigue down, keep the fitness high, and the performance will hopefully go up. So the way that we do this, if I think about this as like the end point of my strength phase, volume is like fairly high, intensity is like moderate, 70 to 85%. I go into my peaking phase. So I drop my volume down a little bit to start, up my intensity, and you can see that fatigue line, so this one right up here, starts to drop off. I drop volume off, that's a big contributor to fatigue. But my fitness line stays fairly high because my intensity's up. So I'm still maintaining that training stimulus. Next part, I drop my volume down even more and jack my intensity up as high as possible. So this is like the hardest or the heaviest period of training that I would do. If we assume this is my competition right over here, so I'm about a week out, 2 weeks out. As you can see again, my fatigue drops off quite a bit, but my fitness stays fairly high. And then in the last week, what I want to do is I drop that intensity, I drop that weight down, and you can see, if this is my preparedness line, I get a big slingshot because I allow for that full recovery while still maintaining my fitness fairly high. So my performance is pretty low as my volume is high, and then once I drop that intensity way off at the end, I get a slingshot effect. So I end up at the competition hopefully being significantly stronger than I am in training. And that's kind of what we want to try and achieve. Does that all kind of make sense? Everybody follow that?